thing's been taking about a minute to connect for some reason.
Yeah, it's been.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Greetings, fellow co-workers. We have awesome news to announce today. This is awesome. We are exactly 25 or halfway point to Pentecost. We have 25 days to go. We have gotten through the 25th day today.
And we got some news about trumpet and the first and last day of unleavened bread for next year. They'll all be at Wahlberg Community Center, just to let everybody know. Give you a heads up on that already.
And Pentecost and Georgetown will be at 405 East Morrill. And we have jumped way ahead of ourselves already. So if you all will bow your heads, we will get started in prayer. Great eternal Father, thank you so very, very much for allowing us to come together so that we can glorify you, that we can be better lights to the world, that we can understand and know you better. We ask you to please descend your Spirit upon everyone that's speaking, upon everyone that's listening, that we can make you proud, that we can have you say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," because that is what we ultimately want to hear. Father, thank you for everything you've given us, and thank you for being so generous to us. So let it be.
I'll let that will be done. All right. Well, good evening, Randy.
Good evening, Ron.
Good evening, everybody out there in internet land, YouTube land, whatever. I guess you were actually expecting to see Mike sitting here tonight. Sorry to disappoint you. Mike, he had like a flu or a bug or something. He went to the doctor Monday, and doctor told him to stay at home. He was on the verge of getting pneumonia, so we'll try to get him here next week, see if he's okay to come. So just keep him in your prayers if you would. He doesn't need to be getting that kind of stuff.
No, not at his age.
Did you have anything else?
Not that I can think of.
Well, you want to tell everybody how to send us an email or a question?
If you want to, it's House of God 101.5?
No, it's House of God 1015 at gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, go down to the bottom. There is a little box down there. You can do it right on the front page. If you're watching YouTube, you can do it right there. Do it on the website, right on the front. You don't have to bring up the browser. But if you want to watch us on the computer, you can go to the live streaming section, and there's a comment section underneath it as well. Didn't mean to steal your thunder.
Oh, no, not at all. But one other thing, because I was looking for some of our sermons and Bible studies and all on YouTube, I found out that if you type in House of God, you are going to get all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
What
you
you
will.
need to do is type in House of God Waco or House of God Austin if you want either of those, the material that we have. But
Which
if
we're getting quite a bit on there.
but if you just type in House of God, okay, I'm talking, YouTube. There is all kinds of stuff out there. And to try to find us, the only way I could find us was putting in House of God Waco or else House of God Austin. Just
Yeah, just to let you
that's
know.
just what it took for me to get through.
And we've got like 20 subscribers on there now. That's people who have kind of bookmarked us, and so that's a quick way to link to us if you haven't done that before. All right, tonight I want to talk about a subject that we're all very familiar with, and we've looked at it in a whole lot of different ways, but I thought I'd kind of look at it in just a slightly different way again tonight. We're going to read the account, or go through the account of Moses leading the people out of Egypt. And when we do that, like I said, we consider a lot of things that went into that journey, or went into the preparation of the journey and stuff. And I'm not going to go into the lead up to it. I'm going actually when God takes them out into the desert, because there's some similarities there and a lot of lessons we can draw from that event or that time period. They were actually out there for 40 years in that, and there was actually two of the tribes who actually stayed. I think one was Gad, and I don't remember what the other one was. It stayed on the other side of the Jordan River, didn't come across with the other tribes. But the lesson I want to focus on tonight is one of faith, but perhaps not in the way that you're thinking, but although it is faith. And it took faith on Moses' part to go before the Pharaoh and demand the release of the Israelites, because, it took faith for him to return to Egypt because he was a wanted man. He could have been executed at his very presence, because he was guilty of killing an Egyptian, and that's something that you didn't do. But anyway, it even took faith on the people's part, if you want to look at that, to follow Moses into a desert where there was barely nothing to sustain their lives or anything else at that matter. And we call it a leap of faith, if that's what you want to reference. But we can learn a lot more about the Israelites in the desert and faith if we just look a little bit harder, I believe. And Moses and the people were in the desert, but whenever he took them out there, you have to ask yourself, or they must have been asking themselves, what's he going to do? How is he going to help us? How is he going to save us? He got us out here, now what's he going to do? And there was a lot of grumbling in that respect towards Moses and his ability to lead the people through that seemingly impossible time. But when we look at how many Israelites that he actually took out of Egypt, there's a lot of different speculation about how many it was and everything else, and what it was, that how many people there was, and commentaries range all over the place about that. But most theologians and people believe that it was between 2 and 3 million that took this actual journey. And some people wonder, well, how can a clan that amounted to about 70, over 430 years, grow to 2.3 million, 2 or 3 million people over a 430-year life or span of time? Well, I did a deal one time. I thought, I want to just see how many people could be on the earth by the time Abraham came around, from the time that they came out of the
Ark?
The ark, yeah, thank you. My brain's not working real good tonight again. But anyway, it's and I think I figured, I was just trying to get a basic idea, and I think I figured it within like a 250-year time span. And I figured that you had two parents, and each set of parents had two kids, and every 20 years they had a set of kids and stuff. And it was up in the millions within 250 years. And then whenever I did that same analysis over a 1,500-year period prior to the flood, just to get an idea of how many people could have been on Earth prior to the flood, and it was like 24 billion people could have been on Earth at the time the flood came around. And that might seem amazing, but this Earth could, under the right circumstances, support that many people, especially if everybody was growing crops and not killing each other. But anyway, within 430 years, it's easily conceivable that there could have been 2 to 3 million. Actually, after looking at that in that way, I believe there could have been more than that. It could have been 5 or 6 million people who came out of Egypt. But it took about 15 generations for this to occur over. And so you take, the old story is you take a penny, then you double it every day, or I'll give you $1 million, which would you take? Take the penny every time. If you take the penny and double it, the next day it's 2 cents, the next day it's you say, well, we're never going to get there. Well, the time you get to 17 or 18 down the line, you doubled it. You're climbing way up there.
Yep.
So take the penny, take it every time. But it states in the Bible that Israel grew really quickly as a people. And that was one of the reasons that they were actually put into captivity. You turn to Exodus chapter 1, verse 6. And it says, Exodus chapter 1, verse 6, and it said, and Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all the generation, but the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied, grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more mightier than we. Come and let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, and they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land. So it was because they were becoming such a plentiful people in that country that they were actually put into servitude, not because they weren't producing already, but so that they could be controlled. And it states in Exodus chapter 12, verse 7, if you want to read that, Exodus chapter 12, verse 37, I should say, that, and it gives us a pretty good idea of how we can come to the numbers that we come to. Exodus chapter 12, verse 37 says, and the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot. I think some of the Bibles read 600 head of household. But anyway, it says, besides children. And then a mixed multitude went up with them also, and flocks and herds and a great deal of livestock. And they baked unleavened bread, though they brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were driven out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had prepared for provisions for themselves. So you had 600 men who were head of house. The majority of these, whenever they take count like these, are men of families and stuff of that nature. So they would have had a wife and they would have had children. And it said, besides the children, it talked about here. So you have to count that they had wives too. So if they each had wives, then you're looking at 1,200,000 people. If they each had, it says children, if they each had 2 children, then you have 2.4 million right there. So and let's be honest, when people don't have televisions, movies, even if they do, but especially if they got to have something to do, so what are they going to do? They didn't have birth control or anything like that, so young people are going to be making children, when they're bored.
And remember, God was blessing them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I kind of think it was a whole lot more than 3 million, but that's just me. You can come to whatever conclusion you want to. But let's look at it. One more thing. It says, to confirm our assertion that there were hundreds of thousands of men who were childbearing age and not counting the younger people, because somebody said, well, they're counting kids and teenagers too. Well, if you turn to Exodus chapter 38, verse 24, it kind of puts that aside too. And I'm just laying the groundwork right now for what I'm getting into, because this is all pertinent as to me trying to draw a picture for you of Israel in the desert. It says, all the gold that was used in the work of the holy place, that is, the gold of offering, was 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. And the silver of those who were numbered of the congregation was 100 talents, 1,775 shekels, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. A bekah for each man is a half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. For everyone included in the numbering from 20 years old and above, for 603,550 men. So this is 603,553 men above the age of 20. So these were adults. These weren't young people. These weren't even teenagers. These were of legal age, as we would say today. So we have a pretty good count as to what we can go up. Now, if you go back, a lot of people believe that kids started marrying, or they married and stuff at the age of 15 and 16 years old back then, which I truly believe they did. You would have even more. So now you ask, well, why is this important considering our faith? Well, they had to get across the Red Sea in one night, and that's one of the things that plays into this. And they went on and depending on what your thoughts is about where they crossed and everything and all that kind of thing, and most of the TV shows, Exodus shows a thin line of people running across. That wasn't so. Not to get there in one night. If they went on a narrow path, double file, the line would be 800 miles long and would require 35 days and nights to get through. So it wasn't just a thin line, no. So there had to be an opening on that side, 3 miles wide, so that they could walk 5,000 abreast to get over in one night.
Wow.
So that's a pretty good stretch right there. And, you look at all these people, it's kind of funny. You stop and think about that. You know the Egyptians are bearing down on you, and they want to slaughter anybody that they can. And you got water on the one side, and you're looking out, and you go, oh, I can get across, but wait a minute. There's 3 million other people on this side of the bank wants to get across here too. So,
and some of those people could have been crossing without seeing the water on either side, because 3 miles is a pretty decent distance.
Sure it is, yeah. So, he pulled you see this you see waves on this side and on the shows and waves on the,
yeah.
But that thing could have been spread out 4 or 5 miles wide, and where they had to go across may have been 3 or 4 miles wide or whatever. So, we don't take a lot of that into account. So when the people get across and the Pharaoh and his army is destroyed and everything, then they're going to go about their normal daily lives. And let's just settle on the number 3 million so we don't have to bounce around. The people who basically that were out there, they needed 2,000 tons. Well, this says for 4 million. The people needed 2,000 tons for 4 million pounds of food each day. To bring that much food each day would require 3 freight trains, each a mile long. Now, that's a lot of food, and you have to stop and consider where that food came from. That was why it was so important for God to send them manna.
Oh, yes.
because there was no way that the countryside around them was going to support that many people. It just wasn't going to happen. And they were already freaking all the villagers out and everything else around them because they were just stripping the land dry as they went through it, firewood and everything else. It was in terms of sustenance, there was just, it just had to be manna. It had to come down to manna.
Just one real quick question. Did you look into how much water it would take?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that.
Sorry about that.
But we have to consider, they also had their herds and flocks and stuff with them, but they couldn't eat them all the time, because if they did, they'd eventually eat up all their breeding stock and everything else, and they'd be totally without it. So they could only occasionally eat meat. And so they mainly sustained their lives on manna. If they had to have firewood to cook this stuff. And to keep warm. And each day this would take 4,000 tons, 8 million pounds of wood, and a few more freight trains, each a mile long, to bring that in.
Not to cut you off, but real quick, we've got a message that came in. They're asking that we look and sound great, and are we getting the message they sent us? The answer is yes. I tried to email you back a reply, but I'm not sure if you got the email back that I sent.
You can't reply to these.
Oh, you can't?
No, not unless
okay, then I wasted my time trying to reply.
Not unless it's it's through the House of God 1015.
Gotcha.
You can reply to those.
You can reply back and they have to.
Yeah. Now, to what you were talking about, water. If they need, of course, they had to have water, and they only had enough to drink and wash a few dishes. It would take 11 million gallons each day. A freight train with tank cars, 1,800 miles long, just to bring water.
1,800 miles? Well, think how much water came out of the rock when Moses struck it. And then, well, how about the wells? After 3 days, they were groaning about water. And they went to I think of Mara. What's the name of it?
Mara.
Yeah, Myra. How big or how massive were those wells?
Oh, when they used to dig wells, they didn't dig a tiny little well. I mean, they dug out cisterns.
Well, this would have to be huge for the millions of people to be able to get the water.
Yeah.
Wow.
And each time they camped at the end of each day, they needed a campground. Get this. 2/3 the size of the state of Rhode Island, about 750 square miles. It's just mind-boggling when you think about that. How much logistics it took just to move the camp, just to give them water, and it's my assertion, and I can't back this up. It just said that they were nomads in the desert for 40 years. But I would believe once they found a spot, they pretty much stayed there until they taxed either the people, the nation around them, or all of the resources that were there that they could draw upon, like water and firewood and different things like that.
They were spread out so much. I'm thinking communications at this point.
Yeah.
If all they had was horns to communicate with, to get from the middle, let's say the middle, outwards, how many hours would it take? How long would it take to get the outer edge?
It could probably take days. And here's the thing we don't stop and think of, and we're starting to move into what I'm talking about tonight. People on one side of the camp probably never even met anybody on the other side. They stayed within their own area for the most part and stuff. And, there was people there for their whole lifetime that only knew the immediate people around them. They didn't know the people on the other side of the camp.
There was no reason to go to the other
or
side.
the north or the south.
You stayed in your own little clan.
Now, and there was,
Wow.
it's so, you're moving this entire nation, or this entire city. It's like moving the whole city of New York somewhere in that fashion, or Los Angeles. You just go, say, okay, let's move. How many people in Los Angeles know everybody in Los Angeles? Nobody.
No.
Nobody. Not even the most notable person in Los Angeles knows everybody, or everybody knows him even, or her. So, it's just mind-boggling when you put it in that context and you look at that and you say, well, this is a nation of God. And the only common thread in that whole community, in that whole march, is God in the center.
The tabernacle.
The tabernacle. Yes. And the pillar of fire by night and a pillar of smoke by day.
Yep.
And they can look up and they can see this. But Moses he wasn't thinking about this. I can't believe that he was, because this had to be an enormous task for him as well. But he wasn't planning this out before he left Egypt. Now, they probably took enough food with them to last 2 or 3 days, on the march and stuff. But after a time, maybe say even 2 or 3 weeks, but after a time, they're going to start getting food and water and stuff from someplace else.
Well, water was 3 days.
Yeah. So now that you take a kind of get a picture in your mind, you can see that it took a whole lot of faith on those people just to walk out there. It might not take a faith to walk that much faith with 2 or 3,000. You're with 2 or 3,000 other guys or whatever, and you're walking out there and stuff, because you can find things here and there and stuff, But 3 million other people, it's just mind-boggling. It's incredible.
And you realize that when they're walking, people are picking up their sticks, firewood, and all. By the time you get to the last people, the land's already been stripped. They have nothing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and this is the obvious part of the story, like I said, or maybe not so much toward the end, but there's just, if you let your mind just sink around or wrap around this a little bit, there is so much more to absorb in this. Just the operation of a community that size, what went on in their daily lives and stuff, everyday operations. It's just mind-boggling. For example, items like utensils and sewing needles and all these kind of things have to be carried and considered and thought about.
You've got a worse problem than that.
Tent.
The worst problem, and the military always looks at this as one of their priorities, is sanitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where do you go to the bathroom without contaminating the rest of the people?
You have to. The people in the center, there was no way for them to go all the way outside the edge of the camp and dispose of anything. That they had to make an area within the areas to where they could, that were specifically put there for that.
And then it'd be all over this area. Wow.
And you had to know what you were looking for, so there had to be some kind of regulation as to what
flag or something.
Flag or something, yeah. So, you have to take all of this in mind. And I can't see them constantly moving all the time.
Well, it says that they stayed a year in one place and stuff like that.
And I think they probably even stayed maybe 4 or 5 years in different places and stuff. Because why move? Why go through all of that to move on a daily basis? I don't think they did that at all.
And you know what? What's been hitting my mind a lot is I now understand why Jethro, I think his name was Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, said, you can't do this on your own.
No way.
Yes, that man had some wisdom to say, hey, you have got to get this thing organized.
Well, probably what was happening is you were getting little dictators popping up around, and there was beginning to be chaos within the camp a little bit, and there was no organization, and people weren't respecting this. So God said, okay, you appoint captains over 50s and 50s and different things, hundreds and different things like,
Yep.
and thousands and stuff like that. And then that way they had some kind of hierarchy and an authority that worked there, and somebody and basically a police force that could
That's
maintain.
what they were, a police force.
Yeah.
What also, I don't mean to get off.
No, that's okay.
Is Miriam, when she, her and Aaron, when they went against Moses, and she was sent outside the camp for 7 days because she had leprosy. She was many, many, many miles away from where Moses was. I never really thought about the distance she had to travel that far and then have to travel all that time back. Oh, she was far away from Moses.
So, yeah, you know, and so communities like this, they're going to do what they have to survive, you know. We were talking about that earlier about, you know, EMT ever hit with these new cars and things around here, boy, we'd be in a lot of trouble and different things. But we look at people and all their fallacies, and we see, in this case, we see a people led by God, and in the most harshest environment in the world. He took them out in the middle of one of the worst deserts there is in the world. And to me, that's incredible. You know, if you're going to take a people somewhere, why would you take them out there?
Yeah, it kind of, if you look at the law that was given, you know, things with skin infections, how says you have to go outside the camp, you have the priest. I know when I was in the military, when we were in Kuwait, before, you know, going into, or even in Iraq, one of the things that we had problems with were staph infections spreading, you know, from platoon to platoon. We had, at one point, we had 80-something people in our battalion sick with staph infections.
And
but if we were separated from the rest of the, you know, for the rest of the units, we wouldn't have had that spread of disease.
And my guess is most of the people who were considered healers at that time lived on the outskirts of the camp.
Yes, they were. Yeah, the doctors. That's where the sick people were.
Yeah, but when you look at these people, and when God took them out in this environment, these people weren't all Israelites. They didn't know each other. They were just called to go out. There was many of them that were Israelites. I mean, not Israelites, but Egyptians or from other nations that were there. They were in the harshest environment known to man. They were from different clans, different nations, different backgrounds, and they came out of an idealism that trusted man and not God, and trusted government and not God. And they were moving into a new ideology to where they had to put all their faith in God.
Yes.
And leave all that other behind. In Isaiah chapter 31, it says, in verse 1, it says, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses, who trust in chariots because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, but who do not look on the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Eternal. Yet he also is wise and will bring disaster, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of evildoers and against the help of those who work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses are flesh and not spirit. And when the Eternal stretches out his hand, both he who helps will fall, and he who is helped will fall. They all will perish together." So people had to take their faith out of mankind, because he was doomed to fail. Man, those systems are doomed to fail. And this Exodus gives us an example of faith that teaches us that we have to rely upon God. Now, I want to move into our world a little bit. We live in the harshest place spiritually. We're in a desert spiritually. Just like they were physically, we are in a desert spiritually. We're in the harshest environment. we could be as spiritual beings.
We have an email. It says, flu killed more people in World War I than bullets due to there being lots of concentration of people on ships, etc. Disease can spread very quickly in concentrated populations. Civil War, we lost a lot of people through diseases.
Diseases killed a whole lot more than guns and bullets did. But this world is a desert and the harshest place for us spiritually, and you can't find a worse place and try to survive spiritually. But we have the same thing that the Israelites had. We have God. We have Jesus. He's the one who was out in the desert with them. That's plain to see in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 5, if you want to look at that, where it said that let's turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter, I wasn't planning on reading it, but I think people I try to read this as often as I can because this clearly points to who was leading these folks in the desert. Chapter 10, verse 1, he says, Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all of our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food. All drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. So it was Christ who was there. He was the one who was leading them in a pillar of fire by night and a pillar of fire, smoke by day. But
we have spiritual food. We have spiritual drink today.
Right here.
And the part that is really kind of to get you thinking was verse 5 where it says, but with most of them, God was not well pleased.
Yeah.
We have to ask ourselves, is God pleased with what we are doing, with what we are thinking, and how we are talking?
Yeah. Now, the nation of Israel at that time was living together, and they were packed in around each other like sardines. They suffered together, they sang together, they cried together. They could hear each other from one tent to another, so they were becoming very close friends.
Yeah.
They relied upon each other. They did. They may have been strangers when they began their journey, but they soon became citizens together as one people under the cloud of God. And all their hopes and cares were hinged upon God and one another. They had to rely upon one another. They couldn't just rely upon God only. They had to rely upon each other as well. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. If you want a small taste of what they went through, the experience with other people around them, camp during the Feast of Tabernacles with other brethren. It is a totally different...
It's a different experience.
Yes.
It really is.
Because when you're in a motel, you can shut a door, you can shut people out. I hate to say, when you zip a flap on a tent, that doesn't keep anybody out, and you can hear what everyone is saying, doing, inside and outside the tent.
Yeah, exactly right.
And people will bond closer when they are camping because you've got a campfire, and that's like those folks.
Some of our greatest memories at the Feast of Tabernacles is camping out and being in proximity with all the other people of God. Coming together.
When I first started going to Feast of Tabernacles, first few years I don't remember, I was a little kid, but later I do. And Big Sandy, they had the piney woods where there were thousands of people that camped. The whole area was set up for camping.
And that gives you a good flavor of what these folks were doing. Even with our modern day amenities that we take camping with us today, it's different. And I know that we felt some frustration at times when we were at the feast and we were camping and stuff, but that's typical. I feel it even when I'm in a motel room and stuff. But these people, they were out there for their entire lives, and I'm sure at times they felt that there was a lot of frustration over the conditions that they were living. They grew to condition themselves and to make do with what they they had and make a better life for themselves, or how they found themselves. And they may even, a lot of people, I hear this in our church today, they may even think, well, I can see God, I know what He says, and I know what He wants and everything else, but I don't think He sees me anymore. I think He's left me or something like that. I hear that from people, and it kind of irks me, it pains me in the heart when I hear that. So it tells us in Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 14, just for those folks, it says, and for these folks too, he says, but Zion said, the Eternal has forsaken me, and my Eternal has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son in the womb? Surely they forget, yet I will not forget you. I have inscribed you on the palms of my hand. Your walls are continually before me. And I've talked with so many of God's people over the years that they express the same anxiety these folks must have displayed. But what happens, I believe, is they lose touch with their community. They lose faith in one another as Christians. And even though God says He'll never leave us or forget us, humans have a way of just trying to move on in their thinking and traveling, wanting to get out there and just travel alone in the spiritual desert. But you can't do that. You have to stay, because safety is within the camp. In the desert, in this world, you maintain relationship with those of like mind and same purpose, and because your spiritual life, their physical lives depended on it, our spiritual lives depended, and their spiritual lives is too, but more so because they were in a physical plane with it. So you don't try and go to spiritually on your own. It's never good. In Jeremiah 17, verse 7, he says, blessed is the man who trusts in the eternal, whose hope is in the eternal. For he shall be like a tree planted by the water, which spreads out its roots by the river, and will not fear when heat comes. But if the leaf will be green, and not anxious in the year of drought, nor cease from the yielding of fruit. And what this is basically saying, if you trust in God, even at that time, our time, any time in between, if you trust in God, you'll be like a tree planted in the waters. You'll always have plenty of spiritual food to drink from, and you'll be able to return it to those around you. So when times of trouble do come, trusting God will be our salvation and not our doom. You say trust in God already? You trust in God already? I think a lot of people in those days, just stop and think about it. They tell you, well, trust in God, He'll take us out in the desert. Which God did they trust in? They were just coming out of the world. Whenever He said trust in God, what did their minds go to? Was it the God of Israel? They didn't know the God of Israel. No, they were trusting in something else. And sometimes I think we get caught in that too. We're trusting our old traditions, our old ways of life and old thinking.
One thing that we trust in way, way too much is money.
Oh, yes.
We think money is the answer to get us out of any situation, because we see these rich people, they do horrendous things, they go to court, and they get out because they have a great lawyer.
Yeah.
And then that's just making us think, yeah, money will get me out of any problem I get in, where once when you start worshiping that dollar, it is a downhill slide that you have to nip in the bud as quick as possible.
That's right.
If you've already started down it, you've got to put the brakes on.
And we asked earlier, why did God take them out into the harshest conditions He could find for them? Well, for one thing, stop and think about it. It glued them together as a nation. It literally did. Their lives depended upon each other and God. And God took them in the desert also to separate them from the world, to take them out of the world and teach them His way. But He also took them out there to be tested. Greatest testing ground there is. Deuteronomy 8:11, He says, Deuteronomy 8:11, he says, "Every commandment which I command you today must be carefully observed, that you may live and multiply and go in to possess the land which the Eternal swore to your fathers. And you shall remember that Eternal your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep His commandments or not." So He humbled you, to allow you to be hungered, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that He might make you known that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Eternal. Your garments did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. You should know in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so the Eternal your God chastens you. And I think we tend to forget that, because this moves back to us spiritually. He put us in this environment spiritually to test us, to see if we would obey, to see if we could pass a test like Abraham did with Isaac when Abraham took him up there, and he was going to sacrifice Isaac because of the commands of God asked him to do this. And Abraham built an altar, placed wood in the order, and got ready and laid his son down there and was bringing the knife down. And God said, "Stop." He said, "Don't lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Now, Abraham had to have faith to do that. But Isaac had to have faith as well in God and in Abraham, his father, that the right decision was going to be made. And what would have happened if he'd have made the wrong decision? What would have happened in the desert if society would have broke down and worldly influences caused wrong decisions to be made? Thankfully, like Randy said, Jethro stepped in, and things got worked out.
We've got a couple of emails.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Real quick, the one says, "Thank you. You just explained why I love watching your Bible study and services. I need to be bonding with God's children, even if it is only online."
Yeah.
Yes. And then we have another one. It says, "After 9/11, so many people called on God. How quickly was God forgotten? Sounds like the people, when God spoke to them from the mountain, they made a public commitment to obey God's law, then also forgot quickly."
Oh, my goodness.
That is human nature right there, is what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly right. You know, in times of trouble, in the harshest environments, in the worst places in the world, people come together. Yeah. There's very little racism in a combat zone. I'm going to tell you that right now. I've been there. You don't look at your buddy next to you color or where he's from or what he's from or anything else, because your life depends on him and his life depends on you. And that's the way they were. And we talked about, you know, in times of trouble where we look for help and stuff. And sometimes working out God's ways may come from, it may have came from the other side of the camp for Israel. The solution may have came from the other side of the camp. People you don't even know, people you've never met, people that you've never heard of, but believe in God just the same as you do. The solution may have came from them. And vice versa. You may have a solution that helps the other side, or people around the world that you never know that are God's people, because we're still in the camp. We're just in a spiritual one. We're not in a physical one. And sometimes we don't have all the answers to all the questions. It doesn't mean we're wrong. Just may mean we don't have a perspective that others may have. When the camp looked upon God in the daytime, they saw this pillar of smoke that was hovering over the entrance of the holy place. And this is where Christ was residing. And they looked upon him in the wilderness, and everyone saw him wherever they were standing in this 750 square mile, and they looked up and they saw God. They knew that he was there. They knew he was present. But they're spread out over this vast place. And they're looking at him, but they're looking at him from their perspective. And what is going on around them, and what is happening in their lives around them, has an immediate effect on how they're looking at God. And how the people around them are social and cultural and everything else has an immediate effect. It may not affect the people over here like it affects you, because that's from their perspective they're looking at God. But we're all under the same cloud. We're all under the same God. We're all under the same rules. We have the basic tenets of what we're supposed to do. We just may have a different view of God.
They had a different view of God depending on where you were at in the camp.
Exactly.
If you were in the center of the camp, that pillar of fire and that pillar of smoke was huge to you. If you were way out on the edges, it might be the size of your thumb, and it wasn't as magnificent because of the distance you are. So the further you get from God, the smaller or weaker he may seem, to where we need to be right up next to God, walking side by side with God, to where he is as big and as helpful in our minds as we can make him.
You went exactly where I was going next.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. It says, when you consider it, some toward the outside may have been the mightier people because they had to protect.
The warriors.
They had to be the protection for the people and stuff. So you may have put those people on the outside. Some of the more brainier, smarter, more inventive people and more lesser abilities to fight and stuff may have been closer to the inner side to help in innovations and different things like that and different things. Some towards the rear were, that was a bad place to be, because you're constantly eating everybody else's dust, on the travel and stuff. But you're also protecting the rear. You're also bringing up the rear and keeping the camp all closed in. Keeping that part of it. And those at the beginning of it, they were the pathfinders, the leaders, and things of that nature, who were adventurous and different things of that nature, and trying to find directions to new land, new waters, new food sources. But everyone had to have faith, and everyone else was doing what they were supposed to be doing. You didn't see the people in the rear if you were in the front. You didn't see the people on the east if you were on the west. You had to have faith that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing while you were doing what you're supposed to be doing.
So what you are saying is the body, not everyone can be an eye, not everyone can be a mouth, as it talks about in the New Testament.
But God knew who was best suited for the positions, just as I mentioned.
Yep.
Who could fight, who could lead, who could suffer the onslaught of constant criticism if it came to him, or who. He put who he needed where. It tells us in Psalms 139, verse 1, he says, "O Eternal, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Eternal, you know it altogether. You have hedged me from behind and before, and I've laid out your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. If I take wings in the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. And if I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Indeed, the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you." So, God knows us. He tells us simply, He knows our abilities. He knows what. And He knows us as a people. He knows us as a person. He knows us as a community. He knows us as a church. And He knows what our abilities are. And we have to take care of our responsibility in the community of God's spiritual camp in order to make the whole camp work. Yeah, we can't falter. When we do falter, we have things happen to us like the worldwide breaking up and going back into the world and different things of that nature. We can't let those things, we have to uphold our responsibility in the camp. We have the ability to call upon God in times of need if we need to, just as those people did. They could go to the tent, the meeting of the tent, and talk to Moses and God. And he tells us in Psalms 50 to call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. You know, we often think that our journey through this world is like the one that Israel took through the desert. We like to think that, and that there is a lot of similarities. There is I mean, in that respect, it's true. But one thing I believe we forget in both cases, what Christ was leading them through the desert, wherever Israel was in the camp, they could look up and see their salvation. They knew it was there. All they had to do was respect it and obey it. But it went the other way as well. Wherever Israel was in the desert, Christ could look down upon his people. And it tells us in Psalms 33, verse 18, he says, "Behold, the eye of the Eternal is on those who fear him, on those who hope in his mercy, to deliver their soul from death, and to keep them alive in famine. Our soul waits for the Eternal. He is our help and our shield, for the heart shall rejoice in him, because we have trusted in his holy name. Let your mercy, O Eternal, be upon us, just as we hope in you." God looked at all of us then and now. Now, their journey was completed 3,500 years ago. Ours still underway. We're still trudging our way through the desert. We're still waiting for the horn to blast to tell us when to move. We're in the camp of God, his church, his people. We each have something to contribute to that journey. But we have to rely upon each other in the camp. We have to have faith in each other, not just in God, but in each other. Many of God's people are too far away. They're on the other side of the camp. We'll never get to know them. We'll never know who they are. We can see them in glimpses through Facebook and different things like that sometimes, and different things like that, through newspapers, the journal, and different things. But they have a job to do where they're at, just as we have a job to do where we're at. And we have to hold up our end of the bargain. And we have a position that we have to maintain, just like I would at work. I have to maintain a position. I have to do this for God. So we have to do the job God gave us to the best of our abilities and not make a fuss about everything. At least we find ourselves in contention with our Savior. All right, that's the end of my presentation. I'm about 5 minutes early.
No, that was
toward
excellent.
the end.
Well, a lot of what she said, like you said in the beginning, it applies to us today.
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know. You brought out stuff that I never ever thought about, was just the scope, the magnitude of how huge this endeavor was to try to get some type of a government organization going, because you have to have some type of government organization. How to just move the people. Thankfully, the food was not a problem that Moses had to worry about. Now, water he did at times when they were being tested to see how they would respond to God. But yeah, I never ever dreamt that they encompassed that big of a landmass.
It was humongous. It was huge. I mean, that's why the nations around them didn't want them to pass through their land. They were going to literally obliterate all the resources around them for miles as they were walking through this land. They said that they can go onto satellite and look down at at different parts of the land. They say that they can actually see the trail that they left through the wilderness.
Wow.
Through satellite. Just like they could see ancient riverbeds that aren't there anymore and different things, ancient roads and stuff. They left a mark traveling through those nations. And you just got to imagine a community the size of just 3 million, but I think it was probably closer to 5 and 6 million, because you're talking about head of household with 600, a little over 600,000. That was men 20 years old and older.
And were they still growing as they were in the wilderness? Absolutely,
and that wasn't counting the Egyptians that came out with them and the other people and stuff like that. So there was a lot more people there than I think than we give them credit for. So it was a huge number of people. But this is God's camp. This is who we are today. We are God's camp today. Now, we're not all together camped out or anything like that. But we're in little communities here and there and everything else, and we're here. And I think sometimes where we drop the ball is we don't think of it like that as a little community, because we each have our own homes that are air conditioned and modern conveniences and stuff like that. And we tend to drop the ball on keeping in contact with one another and keeping close to each other.
Well, talking about being in individual camps and all, there's 3 different camps you can visit this Saturday. One is in Austin that starts at 10:30. It's church service in Austin. Waco starts at 1 o'clock, and Houston starts at 12 o'clock. Now remember this, God said that we are supposed to get together on the Sabbath day. Now maybe, as one of our people that wrote in, it may only be through the internet. It's the only way he can do it. But here's the thing, if we are within distance, we are to assemble together, and that's just a commandment from God.
Yeah.
And with that, we are all but at 8 o'clock. So I am going to say, I hope to see you in Sabbath service. And if you go to Waco or Houston, that's cool. That's what you're supposed to do. But may you have a very, very blessed week.
God bless everybody. We'll see you next week.